Consider analyzing your life from your job to your home like an economist.
There's a whole host of reasons why people kind of stick with the status quo, but it's a very powerful force. And I think knowing that, I think that if you're in a situation where you're even thinking about making a big change, you should take that feeling very seriously because there is this big bias that is going to keep you doing the same thing.
But paying attention to the research on what works, what makes people happy, that can mean making unusual choices.
Yeah, Tony, we've done surveys about what people care about when buying homes, and people tend to prefer larger homes over shorter commutes. But I think that people may end up regretting that preference in the long run because you are potentially losing an hour or more every day during that commute.
Today, Redfin's chief economist Daryl Fairweather applies lessons from economics to almost everything.
You have to go into that competitive environment knowing that, you have to fight for those promotions and fight for those pay increases and quit jobs that are holding you back because it is like, this treadmill where if you don't keep up, you might fall behind.
Welcome to It Turns Out. I'm Kara Miller. Daryl Fairweather is the author of Hate the Game from the University of Chicago Press, and she urges everyone to use economic tools and research to optimize their jobs, their relationships, even where they live. But let's start off with snagging the perfect home because she's the chief economist at Redfin, and she's got unique insights into the housing market, which she says is actually quite challenging right now. And you probably know that if you've been out there as a potential buyer or seller. So how did things get so messy?
During the pandemic, mortgage rates fell to record lows of around 3% for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, which made buying a home just incredibly affordable during that time. It was a really weird time because a lot of people were out of work, a lot of people were working at home or working remotely, but there was a ton of activity in the housing market, lots of home purchases, and that caused prices to rise.
So back during the pandemic, you've got low interest rates, it's cheap to borrow, and people want to get out of apartments.
But then interest rates went up. They went up by the fastest pace on record, and that made home ownership out of reach for a lot of people who need to finance in order to purchase a home. So that put a halt to the housing market.
Interestingly, for those who had owned homes during the pandemic, this was an enormous win. Their homes were worth a lot more. They might have refinanced with those rock bottom interest rates, and suddenly they were just much richer. But they were also kind of stuck in place, and if they wanted to move, they would have to get a mortgage at a much, much higher rate.
So that has really restricted supply. So right now we have weak demand, weak supply. Prices have been somewhat stable, although they're going up slower than the rate of inflation. But nothing really is moving in the housing market. We're only forecasting a 3% increase in home sales in 2026. So it still feels like we're in this kind of uncomfortable and stuck place in the housing market.
And we're not about to get unstuck anytime soon. In early 2026, housing starts fell to their lowest level since early 2020. Building a home right now is expensive. And even if magically it got a little bit cheaper, we probably still wouldn't build more homes.
We've had this crackdown on immigration, and immigrants make up about 30%, or non-citizens make up about 30% of the construction labor force. So that could be another drag.
Right now, we're dealing with a pretty new phenomenon. A lot of the money in the U.S. is in older households. So if you look at households headed by people over 75, they have seen a surge in their wealth since the 1980s. And households under 35 years old have seen a drop in their wealth. So is this all going to be fixed in the next few years? Maybe just by inheritance?
Some of that wealth will go to healthcare costs because they'll need care as they age. They may end up taking out reverse mortgages on their homes in order to pay for their healthcare costs so that they can age in place. We've done surveys, and most baby boomers believe that they will live in their homes for the rest of their lives. And if that really is their goal, then it's going to be expensive for them to do that because home care aids are expensive, and they'll have to figure out a way to pay for those costs.
So let's say you're pondering the idea of making a move and buying a house in this market. Some people are going to be buying their first home, and other people are going to be wanting something bigger or more expensive. How do you make both of those moves smartly?
Yes, so for that first-time home buyer who's deciding whether or not to renew their lease versus go and buy their first home, they should know that we do forecast that rents will start to increase this year. Rents were stable for about the last 3 years, but historically rents go up, and we think that that trend is going to start again with rents going up. So that's a risk to consider of continuing to be a renter. Right now, if you're considering renting a one-bedroom apartment versus buying a one-bedroom condo and financing that purchase, it's going to be much more affordable, the monthly rental payment versus the monthly mortgage payment because of how high mortgage rates have gotten. But that's a very apples to apples comparison. I think most people, when they want to become a first-time home buyer, they want a larger home, and it's harder to find rentals available for 2-3 bedroom homes. So that's when a lot of people want to make that jump to being a homeowner. So I think the first thing to do is just figure out, can you actually afford the home that you want, that you would actually stay in for
Mhm.
5 years? Because 5 years is around the time where the costs of purchasing the home start to diminish, and the benefits of building equity start to overtake that. If you can afford that home, I think that now is a perfectly fine time to buy. There's not going to be much competition. The market is pretty stable in terms of valuation. So like sellers and buyers should, I think, be more on the same page this year in terms of prices compared to last year when sellers and buyers couldn't agree on price. So I think this year, if you personally are in a good position to buy, you should just feel confident going forward with that, because ultimately you're locking in a price, you're locking in a mortgage rate if you want to get a fixed rate mortgage, and at least you'll have that certainty of knowing that you can afford the home that you want.
How about people in their 30s and 40s who maybe already have a home and are looking to get a bigger home? I don't know if you see a bunch of those people. And, we were talking before about older people wanting to age in place in their homes, which are sometimes old, like these are maybe bigger homes where they brought up their kids, but the kids aren't there anymore. Is it tricky for people to sort of get up to the more expensive or the bigger home because like that supply doesn't exist?
Yes. So let's say somebody bought a starter home during the pandemic when rates are really low, and they've outgrown that starter home and they want to move to a bigger home. It's going to be pretty expensive for them to do that because of how much higher mortgage rates are now.
Yeah.
Even if they were to move into a similarly priced home, they might end up spending thousands of dollars more each month just because of that mortgage rate difference in terms of their monthly payments. The people that are going to have a much easier time making that kind of a move are people who have already accumulated a lot of equity in their homes that they can use to pay at least a portion of their next purchase in cash. People who have a lot of stock market holdings that they can use towards the purchase of a home so they don't have to borrow as much money. Those are the people that are more active in the housing market right now. We're hearing a lot of people who just feel stuck, like even if they wanted to move across town for a new job and they're not even trying to upgrade, it's really cost prohibitive for them to do that, unfortunately.
Because they're stuck in that sort of low rate situation and they can't make the leap to the high rate situation.
Right, right.
Okay. Um, One of the things that's really interesting about looking at like when you were negotiating to buy a home, which you write about, you try to bring in research and sort of the knowledge that an economist has about what works and what doesn't. How do you think you personally were different when you were thinking about like making offers and doing that negotiation than like a normal person who has not read the research would be?
Well, I think that the difference is that I think I was good at checking my psychological biases. A lot of home buyers, they make mistakes that lead them to overbid on homes. Like they'll fall in love with a home before they actually know that they can afford it. Or they will kind of fall for herding behavior and think that a home that is getting lots of offers is the most desirable home compared to a home that has been sitting on the market and hasn't gotten any offers yet. So I think with my economics training, I was able to put some of those biases to the side and just look at the objective facts, which I think made my real estate agent's life easier because they didn't really have to talk me out of making, poor decisions. I could just look at the comps and look at what the home features were and look at the state of the market and just understand that this was the game that I was playing and make a strategy based on that as opposed to making one based on emotion. Buying a home can be very emotional. I mean, it's the American dream. People
For
get a
sure.
lot of pressure from their family about when the right time is to buy a home or what the right kind of home is or what the right neighborhood is. But it should just be like a financial decision at the end of the day. Whether you're buying or renting, the important thing is that you have a place that you feel happy with.
And the falling in love piece that you talked about is real. I mean, like if you go tour a place on a very hot day and it has a pool, maybe it doesn't matter that most days are not hot, but people can be affected by that, right?
Yes, yes. There's research from Devin Pope that proved that, which is pretty funny because it ends up costing people like tens of thousands of dollars. But that's another thing is that because a home purchase is such a big purchase, people will make mistakes that might only be a 1% difference in terms of the total value of the home, but that 1% difference can represent thousands of dollars. And you wouldn't make $1,000 mistake if you were buying something smaller, but the $1,000 savings is still $1,000 savings. So people should, think more about how their biases might be causing them to overpay for a home.
You talk about this thing called the anchoring effect, which traps a lot of people. I'm sure I have fallen prey to it. Can you talk about what it is and maybe how you avoid it?
Yes, the anchoring effect is when a person fixates on one piece of information and they ignore other pieces of information. In real estate, people tend to anchor on the listed price of a home. When you look on a website like Redfin, the thing that you can filter homes by is a listed price. And people tend to think that that is the actual price that that home will sell for. But in different markets, homes sell for above asking price. And in some markets, they sell for below asking price. You can kind of anticipate whether a home will sell for below or above its asking price, depending on how long it's been on the market or how many other people are touring the homes, whether it's considered a hot home on Redfin. So you need to take in all of those pieces of information in order to understand what the optimal offer is going to be.
One of the things that we've seen in recent decades that has fascinated me for a while, and this research has been out there for a while, but you would think that people move a lot more for jobs now than they did like 20 or 40 years ago. But in fact, they move quite a bit less than they did a couple of decades ago. Is that why is that? People seem a lot more stuck in place. Do you think that's a housing market thing or what's happening here?
I think it does come back to the housing market.
Yeah. Okay.
So one source of unemployment in the economy is called structural unemployment. And it's the thing that makes it just difficult for people to get the job that they might be best suited for, or that might pay the best, because it's just hard for people to find those jobs. But one source of that is geography. Like maybe you're, I don't know, a software engineer, but you live in Texas and all the good jobs are in California, and there's this hurdle for you moving to Texas to California to get that job. One issue is that we aren't building enough homes in the places that have the most jobs. There's a lot of NIMBYism, that means not in my backyard, about building dense housing in neighborhoods that maybe historically weren't as dense, but that ends up restricting the number of people that can live in cities near these jobs, and it ends up dragging down economic productivity as a whole. So I think the high cost of housing in places that have the best jobs like New York, LA, San Francisco, DC, Boston, is making it harder for people to match with jobs that they might be best suited for and might be most productive in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it also, you can see why some of these divides in the cost of housing, if you're a software engineer in Cleveland and you are hoping to go to the place with the most software engineering jobs, which is the Bay Area, but you've got a couple of kids, how do you sell your $300,000 home in Cleveland and buy a $3 million home in the Bay Area? I mean, it's hard to make that leap, even if you could theoretically or actually get the job.
Yeah, and it creates this cycle where, say, like Facebook, if they want to recruit a software engineer from Cleveland, they need to pay them a much higher salary for them to be able to afford that move. But then when they have that salary, they end up paying for housing, bidding on housing, competing for housing, and then the cost of housing goes up because Facebook is paying more money, and it all ends up getting absorbed into the value of the land instead of actually, being spent on more productive parts of the economy. So it's
Right.
really insidious the way that not having enough housing supply can hold back the economy.
So let's turn it around for a second. Let's just assume you're selling a home. Also, something that you've done and something that you talked about, that you have written about. Um, if you're thinking about selling a home in 2026, not a lot of demand, which feels kind of scary. What's the top piece of advice for how to go about it?
Yeah, one thing I write about is really having the best debut of your home, the best premiere of your home. We've done research that shows that homes get the most views on Redfin the first 3 days that they're listed. So you want to make sure that you are listing the home in a manner that will attract the most serious buyers for that home. A lot of sellers, they feel like they should list their home at the value that they value the home at. And
Hmm.
people, they get attached to their homes, they fall in love with their homes, they feel like their home is special, and they end up overvaluing their home compared to what demand actually is. So it's really important to do your research and see what similar homes have been selling for. Home values are pretty stable right now, so those comparisons of what homes have sold for last year should be pretty accurate compared to this year. And don't overprice your home just because you feel like it should sell for that much, because you're going to end up sabotaging yourself, because people use filters to decide which homes to tour. And if your home is
Right.
priced out of their budget, they're not going to tour it, even if, even if your home might end up selling for that in the long run anyway. Last year, we saw more price drops than we usually saw. And that was because sellers really couldn't get the message that the market had changed and that there was less demand.
Well, so the opposite side of pricing your home high is like maybe sparking a bidding war. What do you think of the purposefully underpricing to get a bunch of people interested?
I would say that you should not price below what you're actually willing to sell the home for. I think
Okay.
everybody kind of has their reservation price of, I'm not going to sell unless I get at least this much money. And reservation prices, I think, are kind of elevated right now because so many homeowners have really great mortgages, where if they're not going to get enough money for the home, they're just better off staying put because at least they have a cheap mortgage. So I think be honest about yourself about what is the actual number that you would sell the home for, and price pretty close to that. I mean, it kind of depends on the thickness of your market. You don't want to underprice too much in a thin market where there just aren't that many people looking, because it might take a
Mm.
while for the person who is willing to make the strongest offer to find your home in a very thin market, meaning there aren't a lot of buyers relative to the number of homes that are out there. But in a thicker
Got
market
it.
where there's lots of buyers, like in a major metropolitan area or in a very dense neighborhood, I think that pricing a little low can be advantageous. And in a market like the Bay Area, that's where we see a lot of this kind of strategy of people underpricing and then homes sell for above their listed price,
Mm.
because there is a lot of demand for homes in the Bay Area.
When you think about negotiating and selling, you talk about this strategy that I've heard a lot, I've seen a lot, which is very often if you're in a pretty high demand area and you're selling your home, people will write you letters like,
Mhm.
oh, they will make an offer, but along with this offer will come like a letter like, here's why we really want your home. We've got 2 kids, we're whatever their thing is. And you got those letters and you read none of them. Why?
Well, I mean, those letters I think are just a distraction, and they're trying to pull at your heartstrings to get you to give them the home for a lower price.
Mm.
And I know some people are opposed to the idea of selling to an investor, or maybe they have some personal preference of seeing a family with young children move into their home because they raise their kids there and they want to see kids continue to live in that home. It all goes back, I think, to sentimentality on that. But in any other situation, would you give a stranger $30,000 just because you like them? It's kind of ridiculous, but that's what you end up
Right.
doing if you're going to give somebody preferential treatment for the purchase of a home. So I think that you're just better off not even opening the door to letting somebody tug on your heartstrings, and just kind of be a little bit more cold and calculating. If you really want to help a family, maybe take a portion of the proceeds and donate to a charity that helps families instead of just helping one individual family. And then there's
Hmm.
also some unintended consequences I think people don't think about when doing that. People tend to want to help out people that remind them of themselves. Like if you have a family, maybe you want to help out another family. But that can create unintended bias against non-traditional families or against single people or against older people or whatever it might be. I think that there's already a lot of implicit discrimination in the housing market, and you're probably better off just not knowing that kind of information because you don't want it to bias you and contribute to that kind of discrimination.
You know, when you think about moving to one of those, to a big city where maybe you are going to get a job that really pays you quite a bit of money, Seattle or Silicon Valley or wherever, how do you think you should think about that job offer, which again might be really lucrative, but again, the place where you're moving is really expensive. Like you got that kind of offer. How do you think about like the trade-offs there?
I think that when you are early in your career, you are much better off moving to a place that has a lot of job opportunities versus a place that has low housing costs. I mean, ideally, you'll move to a place where your opportunities will increase to the point where your salary is increasing faster than the cost of housing is increasing in that area. But I think
Hmm.
that does take like gumption. You have to go into that competitive environment knowing that, you have to fight for those promotions and fight for those pay increases and quit jobs that are holding you back because it is like, this treadmill where if you don't keep up, you might fall behind. So I think there's a lot of these high opportunity cities are called high opportunity for a reason. There are pathways to make a lot of money in those areas and come out ahead of the housing costs. And then when you're older and, you're already well established in your career, you may be able to take that income and move somewhere where housing costs are lower. Nowadays with remote work, I feel like that's a lot more possible than it was, before the pandemic. And I took that choice. I left Seattle for
Right.
rural Wisconsin, and now my cost of living is super low, but I still have the high city salary that I earned in Seattle. So I think that, there's a time for everything, but when you're at the beginning of your career, I think prioritizing your career prospects is the most important thing.
How do you think about, with a lot of those cities, a painful commute can be part of that equation. And I know there's been really interesting research done at Harvard Business School and other places on like the, detraction and happiness that comes from having a really long commute both ways. Give me a sense of what that trade-off feels like to you and what you should be willing to do and how you optimize and what you should be optimizing for.
Yeah, it's funny. We've done surveys about what people care about when buying homes, and people tend to prefer larger homes over shorter
Yes.
commutes. But I think that people may end up regretting that preference in the long run, because you are potentially losing an hour or more every day during that commute. So I think that if I was giving advice to somebody, I would say prioritize being closer to your job if you're able to. Now, there are some people who, maybe they have kids and they need their kids in certain schools, or maybe they have a partner who has a job somewhere else and they have to
Right.
balance those things. So it's definitely, a hard trade-off to make, but don't underestimate the downsides of that commute. You can quantify it, you can put it in dollar terms of this is how much lost time I have, and this is the value of my time. And hopefully that will help make that trade-off a little bit easier to process.
What you say rings so true because I think people do want very often like a house with a lawn. But, I'm in the Boston area, but you could say this about so many large metro areas. I have met people who commute from New Hampshire, from Rhode Island. These are long commutes. And even if you only do it a few days a week, they can be like 3 hours or more in a given day. And but it's interesting, just as you say, that people want like the house with the lawn and they're willing to go far to make that happen.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that American dream that it's just so valorized in our society, home ownership, having the picket fence, that people will pay a lot in terms of their time or even their money to achieve that. And another thing people don't even consider is like if you live far away from your job, you're probably going to need a car or an extra car. Versus if you live close, you might be able to walk or take public transit, and those car expenses can really start to add up.
Yes. In fact, we've seen insurance go up recently, the cost, just the sticker price of cars go up. So the car thing is a a real consideration on the money front.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about negotiation at jobs, which you did. Everybody has been in the situation, I think, of like, either I want more money or I want a promotion. How do I approach this? What's the best way to do it? And maybe we can start off with like inside options versus outside options, which is sort of, I think, economists speak, but you talk about it a lot. And you, one story that you talk about it in the context of is the story of Beyoncé. So maybe you can tell that and explain inside and outside options.
Yeah. So first of all, when you're negotiating against somebody else, there is the inside option, which is, let's say you're negotiating for a raise. You get the raise, your boss gets to keep you. That's the inside option. But there's also the outside option, which is that you reject whatever offer your boss made you. You end up quitting and you get a job somewhere else. That could be your outside option. Maybe you quit the job and you just take some time off. That could be your outside option. And then your boss has outside options too. They can, delete the role. They can hire somebody else. They can figure out some other path without you involved. So when evaluating whether or not a negotiation is going to be successful, you should think about your own inside versus outside options, and also the inside options and outside options of the person you're negotiating against. In the Beyoncé example, so back in 2001, Beyoncé was a member of a girl group called Destiny's Child. It was a 4-member girl group. But 2 of the members of the group were pretty dissatisfied with how things were going. They felt like Beyoncé was getting all the attention, that she was being put out as a lead singer and getting all the opportunities, and they wanted better opportunities. Beyoncé's dad was the manager of Destiny's Child at the time, and they thought that he was the reason why Beyoncé was getting so many more opportunities. So they went to the group and issued an ultimatum and said, you have to give us equal treatment or we're going to quit. And because the group was only on their first album, they'd only had a couple of hits, I think they thought that the group could not survive without them, and the group would disintegrate if they were to quit. So I think they thought they had a lot of leverage, that their outside option, the group's outside option, was so much worse without them. But they ended up getting fired from the group because they didn't quite realize that the group could survive without them, that there was this outside option the group had to replace them, because Beyoncé really was a star of the group and the group could survive without them, because superstars matter, and they matter in the music industry, they matter in economies. So I think that they misjudged what their negotiating opponent's outside option was, and they also misjudged what their value or role was in that group. And that's something that I experienced too when I was early on in my career. I was very dissatisfied with this consulting job that I had. I went to my boss and asked for more money because I thought that at least if I had more money, that I would be happy. It was at a time when they were already down in Economist, and I was the only economist on this really important project. So I thought that without me, the company would be pretty harmed. But my boss rejected my offer because he could survive without me. And in fact, he would rather survive with somebody else in my place who wasn't going to ask for more money, who would just do as they were told and get the job done. So in that instance, I misunderstood my role at the company. I think the same way that these Destiny's Child members misunderstood their role in the group. But I was better off for it because at least then I knew how I was being valued, and I could leave that company for somewhere else that would value me at a higher level and just put more value on me in general.
Do you think it's common that people, when they're thinking about job negotiation, that they view themselves as indispensable when in fact they are dispensable?
I mean, I think that it's really important to know how indispensable you are. But I think you have to be ready for the possibility that you aren't as indispensable as you thought you were. So when you go into a negotiation, you definitely have to be willing to walk away, right? You have to be willing to say that if I don't get this raise, that I am going to go with my outside option, because it is kind of like this. It can create a lot of conflict to go in and ask for more money. And if you don't get the answer you want, I think that you do have to just accept that that is the outcome that you got. And if you have better outside options and you knew that going in, then you should just be okay moving on to those outside options. So you might not be as indispensable to the company as you thought you were, but I think people also underestimate how much they really need the companies they're working for, and they underestimate how many other opportunities that might be out there for them.
Some of the research that you cite about women, I found really interesting. And you write that in studies, when women act aggressively, that choice is usually attributed to their character. Men's anger is attributed to their environment. In some ways, maybe I wasn't completely surprised to hear that, but it is a little bit discouraging, like, as you know, as you're a woman and you're trying to navigate corporate America, which you were.
Yeah, I think that research I mean, it helps me to just understand what I'm up against when I see research like that. I think that's one of the real valuable things about economic research is it can just add context to the things that we're all experiencing. It's really hard to know whether in a situation
Yes.
things are happening because of yourself or because of that's the way the world is. So reading economic research can help you just understand how the world is, unfortunately,
Right.
even if it is discriminatory. But yeah, when people act out, there's really two ways people can attribute that. It's like either nature or nurture. It's either something wrong with them or something wrong with their environment. And
Right.
unfortunately, men get the benefit of the doubt more than women, which means that women, I think, do need to be more careful about having emotional outbursts at work, and men can get away with having those emotional outbursts at work more often.
Yes, and you talk about that in careers where brilliance, people think you need to be brilliant. People think, like, men are more likely to succeed in those kinds of, like, they're more identified with brilliance.
Yes, there's research to support that. I mean, there's lots of anecdotes I can think of that support that. It's really an unfortunate thing. I think that means that you have to like outwardly display, as a woman, you have to outwardly display your brilliance more often and like kind of prove yourself in every room you go into. You don't get the benefit of the doubt as much.
Let's talk finally about approaching change. You made a big change, which we'll get to, but one of the things you talk about is how the economist Stephen Levitt, who many people know from Freakonomics, has talked about approaching change, and that when you are thinking about change or you're hesitant, like, should you make this change? It's a move, it's a career thing, it's a whatever it is, a relationship change. That in sometimes making the change is more beneficial than not.
Yeah, Stephen Levitt did this really clever experiment where he just had people go on the website and commit ahead of time to making a decision based on a coin flip. He had
Okay.
them input what the decision was. Sometimes it was really high stakes stuff like, am I going to leave my spouse or not? And they would just ahead of time, like make a pact that they were going to flip the coin and go with what the coin said. And, not everybody adhered to what the coin said, but it still provides this instrument, as economists say, for measuring the impact of being nudged into a choice that you might not have otherwise made. And what he found was that the people who made the change reported being better off after checking back in with them. So it just goes to show that status quo bias is a really real thing, that people keep doing what they've been doing just because it's the more comfortable thing to do. It's less scary. There's less uncertainty aversion. There's a whole host of reasons why people kind of stick with the status quo, but it's a very powerful force. And I think knowing that, I think that if you're in a situation where you're even thinking about making a big change, you should take that feeling very seriously, because there is this big bias that is going to keep you doing the same thing. So even if you're questioning whether you want to stay in your job, I would say start applying for other jobs. Like, there's no real downside to just going
Right.
out and
Right.
applying and seeing what's out there. Maybe with the staying with your
Right.
spouse thing, I shouldn't be advocating for that just yet. But when it comes to jobs, I think you should just at least put yourself out there.
But in some ways, it's so crazy to do a coin flip and make a change because of that. But it's fascinating that people are happier who made the change a few months later.
Yeah, I think that people can get stuck in decision paralysis where they're just agonizing over
Yeah.
making the change because
Yeah.
maybe deep down they want to make the change, but fear is what's holding them back. I think for
Right.
a lot of these people who did adhere to the coin flip, they were probably very much on the fence to begin with, and they really just wanted something outside of them to push them in one direction or the other.
Right. Right. Um, we've been talking all along about demanding careers and long commutes and that sort of thing. There was a point at which you made a really big change, which I find fascinating. I think most people don't ever make that kind of really big change. Like if they're in a very competitive area, you know, in a big city, like they stay there, you know, often they stay in that metro area forever. What was it that made you think, and I wonder what other people can take from this, I don't really want to, you were in Seattle, big tech hub. I don't really want to do this anymore.
Well, so I've been living in Seattle for 4 years. I moved to Seattle for a job in the first place. I didn't really have like a lot of roots in Seattle, but you know, you move to a place, I bought a home, I had some stasis there, but then the pandemic happened. And as an economist, I just knew that like, if everything in the world is different and I choose to keep doing the same thing, that's probably not optimal. Like if everything changes but you don't, then like you're probably just stuck because of status quo bias. So when the pandemic started and my company started offering remote work as an option, I immediately just started in the back of my head thinking about it. But the thing that actually pushed me and my family to move was that there was a wildfire in, I think it was California, that blew a whole bunch of smoke into Seattle. And I've experienced these smoke events before, 3 times before in Seattle, and they're tough. I mean, you can't go outside. We'd already been quarantining because of the pandemic, so it's like not only can we not go anywhere, we can't even go into our backyard at this point. I had 2 young children at the time, so we loaded up the car and we drove to my husband's hometown in Wisconsin just to get away from the smoke for a little bit. But just getting out of Seattle and moving somewhere new, that kind of allowed me to break free of that status quo bias and helped me see a different possibility. And it really felt right where I was in this Wisconsin village. It's a resort area, so there's high amenities. It's on a lake. It was easier. My kids were 0 and 2 years old at the time, and I liked that I could walk everywhere. I liked that the school was close by and the library and all of that. I was near my husband's family, and I just got to experience this different way of living. I'd only lived in cities before then, and I liked it. And because my job allowed me to do it, we just made the change. And I feel like it was a really great choice for me. I've actually been living here for 5 years now, which is the longest I've lived in one house in my whole life, actually. I come from a family of movers. I don't have data to back this up, but I would bet a lot of money that like 1% of the people are doing like, I don't know, 80% of the moves in this country. I think there are some people who just move a lot and some people who stay put. And I think I'm just more of the kind of person who moves a lot. But as we discussed, moving can be very beneficial. Moving towards economic opportunity can be beneficial. Just moving when there are better opportunities or better options out there can really advance you in your life, in your career. And I think that people should embrace those kinds of moves, whether they're geographic or in their career or whatever they may be, because there's just a lot of opportunity there.
What if you were advising somebody, since you've done this, like you have actually walked the walk here, if you were advising somebody who's like, I don't know, like I do kind of not like living at, you know, whatever it is, and the LA metro area, it is crazy. It's so hard to afford a home, you know, whatever. And I'm sure you have friends who live in major metro areas who ask you, what to you is like, what's the tipping point? How should they think about the kind of really big change that you made?
Well, I think if you're curious about it, I think you should try to experience what it would be like. If your job allows you to work remotely, even if you already own a home, you could like rent out your home to somebody else for a year and go live somewhere else and rent for a year and just see what it's like. Moving can be expensive, so there is this kind of trade-off between how many moves you want to make and when it's time to commit. The marriage problem is like a classic mathematical problem about, when to settle down and commit. So I recognize that there are some trade-offs, but I think you can minimize the costs by making these kind of trial runs at a different lifestyle and just feeling what it's like. And then once you're in the new place, the status quo bias then shifts. Now it's more difficult to move back, and I think that can be very illuminating in terms of like, well, was the city that I was in really that desirable, or was I just there because it was what I was used to? So I think just taking a break for a few months, a year, however long you want to do it for, can be a good way to test out the waters.
But 5 years in, you feel like, yes, this was the right move like to a smaller town away from the coast.
Yeah, absolutely. I love working remotely. Working remotely was like the best change in my career that I've ever made. So I know not everybody likes it, but I'm super happy working remotely. And if I'm going to work remotely, I want to live somewhere that I enjoy, and I love the lake. The winters are cold, but other than that, I'm very happy where I am.
How do you use economics and what you've learned to think about work versus family and that right balance, and maybe bring into that, like, you have kind of a non-traditional gender role thing, but that also was kind of really thinking in a very logical, like, here's who we are and here's the pros and here's the cons, and like, how do you balance these things, and how should one think about the right balance?
Yeah, so I'm the primary breadwinner in my household. When my kids were young, my husband was the one at home while I commuted into the office back when I had to commute into the office. And it really was just a matter of like, what role did each of us want to play? I really wanted to have a career where I was, where that would take me out of the home. I mean, now I can work remotely at home, but back then it would take me out of the home. My husband really wanted to be a stay-at-home parent. So, despite all the social pressure about which gender is supposed to play those roles, we knew that for our family, that was the best route for specialization for us. And it's not even like a permanent thing. Like now my husband has a political career that he works part-time. So it doesn't mean that like you have to disavow work forever if you're deciding to take some time off. But there are trade-offs, and it's really difficult to prioritize two people's earnings at the same time. Like there's a geographic constriction where, the best job opportunities for one spouse might be in one city, but the best job opportunities for another spouse might be in another city. And if you're always trying to make things equal 100% of the time, you're probably going to end up earning less as a household versus if you just said, we're going to prioritize one person's career for this amount of time. So that's what we did with my career. It was what allowed me to leave San Diego and go to Seattle for a new job because I didn't have to worry about my husband finding a lucrative job in Seattle. And, once I was able to work remotely, we ended up moving to my husband's hometown, and that really helped him in terms of, childcare because we had his family around too to help out with that. So I think in general, you just have to make decisions based on what's right for you and try to ignore the social pressure because people are going to project onto you what they think the right way is to do things. There's even economic research that shows that there's this gap in earnings where women will choose spouses that earn, will not marry spouses that earn less money than them. There's this gap in incomes if you like look at the distribution where there really aren't that many couples where the man is earning slightly less than the woman because the woman will like restrict her earnings so the man earns more, or they'll choose a different spouse where the man earns more just to fit into that societal norm. And I think that is a shame, honestly.
Finally, do you think, you wrote this whole book about economics allowing you, and the research that underpins economics, allowing you to think differently about your life and the things you do and that sort of thing. Do you feel like you think about things in a very different way than you did before you were an economist?
I think that I've always thought about things this way, but being trained in economics has like sharpened my mind even more to be able to see the world that way, if that makes sense. Like I think everybody should learn economics so that they can make these kinds of very important economic decisions more clearly, like look at these decisions for what they are, which really are economic decisions, and kind of understand when they're making a decision based on emotion versus based on rational thought. I think emotions are still really important because emotions can help you understand what you actually value, and that's what you really want to be striving for, is living a life that fits with your values, but you don't want to let them get in the way of you making the choices that get you to that life that you most value.
Daryl Fairweather is the chief economist at Redfin. She's also the author of Hate the Game from the University of Chicago Press. Daryl, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for joining us. Please like us and subscribe to our channel. And if you want to get my weekly newsletter, I tell you who's coming up, why that person's research was so compelling, you can head to itturnsoutShow.com where you can sign up. That's itturnsoutShow.com. Thanks to the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation for their generous support. Thanks to producer Matt Purdy. I'll talk to you next time.